Hey everyone, welcome for this week's episode of Wells TechConnect. Thank you for being here. Glad you could make it. So you can see here in front of me, I have a few different props. These are some of the props we used during our last broadcast. We have here the vent solenoid that we were talking about during our Evap class. This is the cutaway version, and we also have the cutaway of our intake manifold. From our last class, we were talking about intake manifold runner control systems and how these actuators move all these flaps and everything inside the intake. I thought they'd be good to have here because we have some great questions that were asked during our broadcasts. So let's get right into it. A user, One Giant Leap, came on when we were talking about our IMRC system on our Ford Focus. They asked if the freeze frames, when the code set, the P2004 and P2006, if the freeze frames would give you an indication of what was happening when the system fails. That's a really, really good question. Being that this system and this actuator right here is monitored with a position sensor inside of it, during the freeze frames, you would most likely see that the position sensor is reading incorrect. If this were to stick open or stick closed, the position sensor would read either one or the other, and it would be opposite of what the computer thinks it should be. So let's say that it's stuck closed and it's reading such and such voltage. The computer sees that, and it's okay if it's closed and you're at idle, but say all of a sudden you increase throttle. You step on the pedal, you're getting onto an on-ramp, and the computer sees, let's say, 80% throttle input. It expects the engine RPM to increase. At that point, the IMRC system should open the flaps to allow airflow in. If this position sensor doesn't move at all, that's when it's going to flag the code, and it should set a freeze frame that'll look something like, if it is stuck closed, it should look something like a high throttle response, potentially high pulse width on the ejectors, mass airflow sensor might be reading a higher air intake, but this position sensor didn't move from when it was actually on idle. And I suppose this could happen the opposite too. If it were to stick open, the voltage reading out of the position sensor would be opposite of what the computer would see at idle. So great question. I think you could really see on the freeze frames what exactly is happening at that moment. And freeze frames are great too because it's going to tell you a temperature. Remember, this intake manifold here had the gumming up inside, and it only happened when it was hot. So you can learn that from the customer or from the freeze frames. You see the failure of when it happened. You can see the coolant temperature. It was 200 and some degrees. Then you know that this engine was hot up to operating temperature when it failed. So great question. Freeze frames can be very, very useful. Just make sure that you know what you're looking at. All right, on to our next comment here. Jason left a comment, also during our IMRC class. He mentioned that he had diagnosed one out of Ford also, and that his was stuck open all the time. And he said they get very expensive to fix, and that's awesome. Thanks for sharing the story with us. They can be very expensive to fix, and unfortunately, our customer that we worked on this one for, they learned that the hard way also, that they are expensive. If you remember from the class, they had taken it in twice before to have the same part replaced and paid for it twice. So really, theirs was quite expensive too to fix, being that the part was installed twice and didn't end up fixing it. So, love the comment, Jason. Thank you. We like hearing your stories. Share your stories and your what you guys are running into out there. Share them with us. We love to hear them, and we love to, bring them up during this because everybody likes to hear what's going on out there, especially in different areas of the country. Certain people run into certain things on the East Coast that maybe the West Coast guys don't see. So share your stories with us. We love to hear them. So, all right, then we come up to our next comment here, and this comment here was during our Evap class, and we were really talking about the vent solenoid and proving and finding a way to prove out that the vent solenoid had failed because we were running into an intermittent issue. So Marco came on and he left us a comment, and he said, I think you're all wrong. Rust buildup happens, and he's talking about rust buildup. We were mentioning that inside the vent solenoid here, there's rust buildup caused by moisture getting sucked through the filter of the vent and into the solenoid. But Marco here is saying, I think you're all wrong. Rust buildup happens when raw fuel from the gas tank is pulled up through the valve, either from a failing rollover valve or overfilling the gas tank. Modern fuels are a percentage alcohol, which can be corrosive, and we all know that up to 10% ethanol is common in lower tier gasoline. Your moisture theory falls short because air from your filter goes through the canister or tank and fuel. Water vapor is heavier than fuel vapor and drops. Well, first of all, Marco, I love the comment. Thanks for giving us your opinion and calling us out. We love it. You have a theory, we have a theory, and that's great. You know, we can really talk about this. And let's just start from the beginning. Rust buildup happens when raw fuel from the gas tank is pulled through the valve, either from a failing rollover or overfilling the tank. And I'm not sure if you're mentioning or talking about the purge solenoid or the vent solenoid. Typically in this case, and what you're talking about here sounds like you might be talking about the purge solenoid. Raw fuel coming through the purge. Typically you're not going to get raw fuel through the vent solenoid. The vent solenoid is going to actually most times be located relatively high up in the system, as well as the fact that the raw fuel would have to completely saturate the canister to even get to the vent, to even get that far. So corrosive ethanol in the fuels can affect the system, and it's most commonly seen where ethanol is affecting the purge solenoid because the fuel vapors are constantly flowing through that. Modern fuels are percentage alcohol, which can be corrosive, and they can be corrosive on both the metal and the rubber in the system. Ethanol eats natural rubber. That's why in most of these systems you'll find a synthetic style rubber instead of a natural rubber. Typically natural rubber will be that orangish reddish color for natural rubber seals, where synthetic you'll find black or green or whatever color that is less affected by ethanol. But we all know that ethanol in the systems is causing and has been causing problems for a long time. So he's saying here that our moisture theory falls short because air from your filter goes through the canister or tank, and fuel vapor is heavier, or excuse me, water vapor is heavier than fuel vapors, and that's correct. You know, water will settle at the bottom, fuel will float on top, fuel vapors will float on top. So very interesting comment, and I think we're kind of talking on the same page, Marco, that rust buildup can happen from both the ethanol and the raw fuel vapors, as well as moisture. So great question, great comment. You know, I love to hear other people's opinions and other people's theories, because you know that's how we all learn. We kind of bounce ideas off of each other, and from our experience, you know, this is what we ran into on this one in particular. That doesn't mean every single vehicle out there is going to be exactly the same. We're just sharing what we found with you guys, and Marco here is sharing what he's found from his experience. So really, really great comment. Love it, Marco. Keep it up. And Jason and One Giant Leap, thank you guys as well for commenting in. We love to hear what you guys have to say. The feedback is awesome. So let's talk about our next class. Our next class is going to be on August 4th. At noon, like always, in your time zone, so Central, Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific. We're going to be broadcasting at noon, and we're going to be talking about intermittent stall concerns. Intermittently driving down the road, the engine dies. We're going to talk about some tips and tricks for diagnosing and actually being able to duplicate the stall concern. We're going to be hooking up the lab scope, showing graphing step-by-step of how we're going to graph some cam and crank sensors. And we actually have two different case studies here. One is going to be on a 2004 Mazda Tribute with a 3-liter, similar to an Escape. And the other one, I believe, was an 05 Dodge Dakota 4.7-liter intermittent stall. So we're going to be talking about those two vehicles. We're going to talk about the intermittent stall concerns that they had and how we fixed them, and some tips and tricks for you guys to really pinpoint that stall concern without chasing your tail. So that is going to be happening on Thursday, August 4th at noon. That's going to be it for me today, so thank you for being here, and we'll see you guys on Thursday the 4th at noon. See you then.